The young recruit Sarah Martinez stood barely 5 feet tall in her combat boots, her slight frame almost swallowed by the military uniform that hung loose on her shoulders. At 19 years old, she looked even younger than her age, with bright eyes and a determined expression that many mistook for naivety. The recruitment station had been buzzing with activity that morning in 2003, filled with young men and women eager to serve their country in the wake of recent global events. When Sarah walked into Camp Pendleton for basic training, the seasoned drill instructors took one look at her and exchanged knowing glances. She was the kind of recruit they'd seen countless times before. Young, eager, and probably unprepared for the harsh realities of military life. Her bunkmates towered over her, and during the first week of training, more than one of them wondered if she'd make it past the initial physical requirements. Commander James Mitchell had been training Marines for over 2 decades. He'd seen thousands of recruits come through his program, and he prided himself on being able to spot the ones who would succeed and those who would struggle. When he first laid eyes on Sarah during morning inspection, he couldn't help but chuckle to himself. She reminded him of his own granddaughter back home in Ohio. The same petite build, the same youthful appearance, even a similar determined tilt to her chin. "She's only as old as my granddaughter," he remarked quietly to his fellow instructor, Sergeant Davis, as they watched Sarah struggle with her first obstacle course run. The comment wasn't meant to be cruel, but it reflected what many in the military establishment thought about young female recruits. They were often seen as temporary additions to the force, unlikely to see real combat or face the same dangers as their male counterparts. Sarah overheard the comment, but instead of being discouraged, she felt a fire ignite inside her chest. She had joined the Marines not for glory or recognition, but because she genuinely believed in serving something greater than herself. Her father had been a Vietnam veteran who rarely spoke about his service, but when he did, his eyes would take on a distant look that spoke of experiences beyond words. Her older brother had enlisted in the Army 2 years earlier and was already deployed overseas. The training was brutal from day one. Sarah found herself struggling with some of the physical demands that came more naturally to her larger, stronger counterparts. The rope climbing exercises left her hands raw and bleeding. The long marches with full pack seemed to go on forever, and there were nights when she collapsed into her bunk so exhausted she couldn't even remove her boots. But each morning, she was among the first to rise, quietly preparing for another day of challenges. What Sarah lacked in physical size, she began to make up for in determination and intelligence. During tactical exercises, she showed an unusual ability to think quickly under pressure. While other recruits panicked or followed orders blindly, Sarah demonstrated a natural instinct for reading situations and making split-second decisions. Her marksmanship scores were consistently among the top in her class, and she had an uncanny ability to remain calm and focused even when live rounds were flying over her head during training exercises. Commander Mitchell began to notice these qualities, though he was slow to admit his initial assessment might have been wrong. During one particularly challenging night exercise, Sarah's unit became separated from the main group in dense forest terrain. While the designated squad leader struggled with navigation, Sarah quietly took charge, using skills she'd learned during childhood camping trips with her father. She led her team safely back to base camp, arriving before several other units that had started with significant advantages. The other recruits began to see Sarah differently too. Initially, some had been protective, treating her like a little sister who needed looking after. Others had been skeptical, wondering if she was tough enough to be a real Marine. But as weeks turned into months, Sarah proved herself repeatedly. She never complained during punishment exercises. She volunteered for extra duties. She helped struggling teammates improve their performance, often at the cost of her own rest time. One evening, during a brief break in training, Sarah sat on her bunk writing a letter home to her parents. Her roommate, Jennifer Walsh, a tall athlete from Texas, looked over and asked what she was planning to do after basic training. Sarah's answer was simple and direct. She wanted to be assigned to a combat unit. She wanted to serve where the need was greatest, regardless of the danger. Jennifer was surprised by the quiet conviction in Sarah's voice. Most of the female recruits talked about military police work, communications, or support roles, important jobs that kept them away from direct combat. Sarah was different. She wasn't seeking adventure or trying to prove anything to anyone. She simply believed that if she was going to be a Marine, She should be prepared to go wherever Marines were needed most. As graduation from basic training approached, Commander Mitchell found himself reassessing many of his long-held assumptions. The small young woman who had reminded him of his granddaughter had transformed into something he hadn't expected. She still looked young, still had that same slight build, but there was something in her eyes now that spoke of steel beneath the surface. She had not only survived the grueling training program, but had excelled in ways that surprised everyone, including herself. The night before graduation, Sarah lay in her bunk thinking about the journey ahead. She knew that the real test was still to come. Basic training had been preparation, but somewhere in the world, conflicts were raging that would test everything she had learned. She thought about Commander Mitchell's comment from those first days, about being only as old as his granddaughter. Age, she had learned, was just a number. What mattered was what someone was willing to sacrifice for their beliefs, and how much they were prepared to endure for others. Little did anyone know, including Sarah herself, that within 2 years she would be serving in some of the most dangerous combat zones in the world, and that the commander's casual observation about her youth would become a memory that would both haunt and inspire him for years to come. First deployment. The transport plane's engines roared as Sarah Martinez gripped her gear bag tighter, watching the landscape of Iraq unfold beneath them through the small window. It was March 2005, barely 18 months since she'd graduated from basic training, and she was part of a Marine unit being deployed to one of the most volatile regions in the country. The other Marines around her maintained the typical pre-deployment silence, some sleeping, others staring ahead with thousand-yard stares, all of them processing their own thoughts about what lay ahead. Sarah had requested combat assignment, despite the gentle discouragement from several superior officers who suggested she might be better suited for communications or logistics roles. She understood their concerns weren't entirely based on gender bias. At 21, she still looked incredibly young, and her small stature made her stand out among the typically larger Marines. But she had trained for this moment, and she was determined to prove that appearance could be deceiving. Her unit was assigned to Forward Operating Base Courage, located in the notorious Anbar province. The base was a sprawling collection of temporary structures, concrete barriers and fortified positions that had been carved out of the desert landscape. The smell hit her first as she stepped off the transport, a mixture of burning fuel, sand, and something else she couldn't quite identify but would later learn was the permanent scent of conflict. Captain Rodriguez, the unit commander, gathered the new arrivals for their initial briefing. He was a stocky man in his early 30s with tired eyes that had seen too much action. As he looked over the fresh faces, his gaze lingered on Sarah for a moment longer than the others. She could read the question in his expression, the same doubt she'd encountered throughout her training. "Listen up, Marines," Captain Rodriguez began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd been in country for multiple deployments. "This isn't training anymore. The insurgents in this area are well-organized, well-armed, and they know the terrain better than we do. Your survival and the survival of your teammates depends on following orders, staying alert, and trusting your training." Sarah was assigned to First Squad under Staff Sergeant Williams, a combat veteran who'd already completed 2 tours in Iraq. Williams was known for his no-nonsense approach and his ability to keep his Marines alive in dangerous situations. When he first met Sarah, he didn't make any comments about her age or appearance, but she could sense his skepticism. He assigned her to work closely with Corporal Jackson, an experienced Marine who could show her the ropes. The first few weeks at the base were a crash course in the realities of combat deployment. Sarah learned to distinguish between the sounds of different weapons, to recognize the particular whistle of incoming mortars, and to identify the signs that preceded an attack. The base came under fire regularly, usually with mortars or rockets launched from positions miles away. During these attacks, Sarah discovered something about herself that surprised everyone, including her own squad mates, while other Marines, even experienced ones, showed natural stress responses during incoming fire. Ducking, moving quickly to cover, shouting commands, Sarah remained remarkably calm. During her first mortar attack, as explosions erupted around the compound and alarm sirens wailed, she methodically helped move wounded personnel to safety, her hands steady and her voice calm as she coordinated with medical personnel. Corporal Jackson, who had initially been assigned to keep an eye on the new kid, found himself impressed by her composure. Most people, their first time under fire, they either freeze up or panic, he told her after the attack. You acted like you'd been doing this for years. Sarah's first real test came during a routine patrol in the city of Ramadi. Her squad was conducting a security sweep through a neighborhood known for insurgent activity. The streets were narrow and crowded with civilians, making it difficult to distinguish between potential threats and innocent bystanders. Sarah was positioned as the squad's radio operator, responsible for maintaining communication with base command and coordinating with other units in the area. The ambush came without warning. One moment they were walking down a seemingly quiet street, and the next gunfire erupted from multiple directions. Sarah's training kicked in instantly. While taking cover behind a concrete barrier, she immediately began coordinating radio traffic, calling in their position and requesting support. Her voice remained steady and professional even as bullets struck the wall inches from her head. Staff Sergeant Williams, who was coordinating the squad's response to the attack, was amazed by Sarah's performance under fire. She not only maintained perfect radio discipline, but also spotted the muzzle flash of a sniper positioned in a building across the street. Her quick identification of the threat allowed the squad to neutralize the sniper and gain tactical advantage in the firefight. After the engagement, as the squad regrouped and treated minor wounds, Williams pulled Sarah aside. Martinez, he said, I'll be honest with you. When you first showed up, I figured you'd be a liability. Thought I'd be spending half my time making sure you didn't get yourself or someone else killed. He paused, looking at her with newfound respect. I was wrong. You've got the instincts for this work. Word of Sarah's performance began to spread throughout the base. Other squad leaders started requesting her for joint operations. She had developed a reputation for remaining calm under pressure and for having an almost uncanny ability to spot potential threats. Her marksmanship skills, which had been impressive during training, translated perfectly to combat situations. But it was during a medical evacuation mission that Sarah truly distinguished herself. A roadside bomb had disabled a supply convoy several miles from the base, and multiple Marines were wounded and trapped in the kill zone. Sarah's squad was part of the quick reaction force sent to evacuate the casualties. When they arrived at the scene, they found themselves under heavy fire from insurgents who had positioned themselves to attack any rescue attempt. Sarah volunteered to move across open ground to reach the most seriously wounded Marine, who was trapped in a vehicle that was taking concentrated fire. Without hesitation, she sprinted across 50 yards of open terrain, while bullets kicked up dust around her feet. She reached the wounded Marine, Corporal Davis from another unit, who had taken shrapnel to his legs and was losing blood rapidly. Under continued fire, Sarah applied field dressings and administered emergency medical treatment. She then coordinated with her squad to provide covering fire while she helped drag Davis to safety. The evacuation was successful, and Corporal Davis survived his injuries. Later, at the base medical facility, he sought out Sarah to thank her personally. You saved my life out there, he told her. I don't care what anyone says about size or age. You're as tough as any Marine I've ever served with. That night, as Sarah cleaned her equipment and prepared for the next day's missions, she reflected on how much had changed since her arrival in Iraq. The doubts and skepticism she had faced were gradually being replaced by respect and trust from her fellow Marines. She was proving that courage and competence weren't determined by physical size or age, but by training, determination, and an unwillingness to abandon teammates in dangerous situations. Staff Sergeant Williams included a commendation for Sarah's actions during the medical evacuation in his report to Captain Rodriguez. It was the first of what would eventually become many official recognitions of her service. But more importantly, it marked the beginning of Sarah's transformation from a young recruit trying to prove herself into a combat-tested Marine who had earned her place among some of the finest soldiers in the world. The IED incident, the morning of October 15, 2005, began like any other at Forward Operating Base Courage. Sarah Martinez had been in Iraq for 7 months, and what had once seemed like an alien environment had become her everyday reality. She was now considered one of the most reliable Marines in her unit, having participated in dozens of patrols and several significant combat operations. The nervous young recruit who had arrived the previous spring had been replaced by a confident, battle-tested Marine. Sarah's squad was assigned to escort a supply convoy traveling the dangerous route between FOB Courage and a smaller outpost 30 miles to the north. The road, nicknamed IED Alley by the Marines, was notorious for roadside bombs and ambush attacks. Intelligence reports had indicated increased insurgent activity in the area, but the outpost desperately needed medical supplies and ammunition. Staff Sergeant Williams briefed the squad before departure. "Same drill as always, Marines. Eyes open, weapons ready, and watch for anything that looks out of place. The insurgents have been getting more sophisticated with their bombs, so don't assume anything is safe just because we've traveled this route before." Sarah was positioned in the second Humvee of the convoy, serving as both radio operator and gunner. Her vehicle commander was Sergeant Peterson, a veteran Marine from Minnesota who had developed a deep respect for Sarah's combat abilities. In the back seat were Corporals Johnson and Hayes, both experienced Marines who had served multiple deployments. The convoy departed at dawn, hoping to complete the journey during daylight hours when air support would be readily available if needed. The first half of the trip proceeded without incident. Sarah maintained regular radio contact with base command, while scanning the roadside for signs of potential improvised explosive devices. She had become expert at spotting the subtle indicators that often preceded an attack. Freshly disturbed earth, unusual objects along the roadside, or the absence of civilian traffic in areas that were normally busy. 20 miles into the journey, Sarah noticed something that made her instincts flare. The road ahead curved around a small hill, and there were no civilian vehicles visible in either direction, unusual for this particular stretch of highway. More concerning, she spotted what appeared to be fresh digging along the roadside approximately 100 meters ahead. "Sergeant Peterson," she called to her vehicle commander, "something doesn't look right up ahead. The roadside looks disturbed and there's no civilian traffic." Peterson immediately radioed the convoy commander in the lead vehicle, recommending they halt and investigate before proceeding. The convoy stopped while dismounted Marines moved forward to examine the suspicious area. Sarah's sharp eye had potentially saved lives. Embedded in the roadside was a large, improvised explosive device designed to destroy an entire vehicle. The explosive ordnance disposal team was called in to safely detonate the device, but while they waited for EOD to arrive, the convoy found itself in an extremely vulnerable position. They were stopped on open ground with limited cover. Exactly the situation that insurgent forces hoped to create. The attack came from multiple directions simultaneously. Small arms fire erupted from concealed positions on both sides of the road, while mortar rounds began falling around the stationary vehicles. Sarah immediately began coordinating radio traffic, calling in the convoy's position and requesting immediate air support. At the same time, she returned fire with her mounted machine gun, engaging targets that were attempting to close in on their position. In the chaos of the firefight, Sarah noticed that the lead vehicle had taken a direct hit from a rocket-propelled grenade. The vehicle was burning, and she could see Marines trapped inside who were unable to escape through the damaged doors. Without waiting for orders, she grabbed her medical kit and assault rifle and sprinted toward the disabled vehicle. The 50-meter run to the lead vehicle was the longest of Sarah's life. Bullets snapped past her head, and mortar rounds exploded close enough to shower her with dirt and debris. When she reached the burning Humvee, she found 3 Marines inside, 2 of whom were unconscious and 1 who was severely wounded but still alert. The vehicle's doors were jammed shut from the explosion damage. Sarah used her rifle butt to smash out the remaining glass from a side window and began pulling the trapped Marines to safety one by one. The first Marine she extracted was Corporal Wilson, who had suffered a serious head injury and was bleeding heavily. She dragged him to cover behind a concrete barrier and immediately began administering first aid. Returning to the vehicle for the second Marine, Sarah found herself under direct fire from an insurgent sniper who had positioned himself to target anyone attempting a rescue. Ignoring the immediate danger, she climbed partially into the burning vehicle to reach Lance Corporal Thompson, who was unconscious with multiple shrapnel wounds. As she worked to free him from the tangled metal, she could feel the heat from the vehicle's fire growing more intense. The third Marine, Sergeant Collins from the convoy security team, was conscious but trapped by a piece of twisted metal that had pinned his leg. Sarah used a crowbar from the vehicle's emergency kit to pry the metal away, all while the vehicle continued to burn around them as she helped Collins escape through the window. A secondary explosion from the vehicle's fuel tank knocked both of them to the ground. Sarah's ears were ringing from the explosion, and she had suffered burns on her hands and arms. But she immediately checked on Collins and the other wounded Marines. Collins had broken ribs and a severely injured leg, but he was alive. Thompson remained unconscious but was breathing. Wilson's head injury was serious, but the bleeding had been controlled. While providing medical care to the wounded Marines, Sarah continued to coordinate radio traffic with one hand, directing incoming air support to the insurgent positions and updating base command on the convoy situation. Her calm professional demeanor under extreme stress helped maintain order during a chaotic and dangerous situation. The firefight continued for another 20 minutes before air support arrived and successfully drove off the attacking insurgents. Medical evacuation helicopters landed shortly afterward to transport the wounded Marines to a field hospital. All 3 of the Marines Sarah had rescued from the burning vehicle survived their injuries, though their recovery would take many months. After the convoy returned to base, Captain Rodriguez called Sarah into his office for a debriefing. "Martinez," he said, "what you did today was extraordinary. You saved 3 lives while under direct enemy fire, and you did it without regard for your own safety. That's the kind of heroism that deserves recognition." Sarah's actions during the IED incident resulted in her first Purple Heart, awarded for the burns she had suffered during the vehicle rescue, and a Bronze Star for her heroic actions under fire. But more importantly to Sarah, all 3 Marines she had rescued eventually returned to duty, and their families would be able to welcome them home. That evening, as Sarah sat in the base medical facility having her burns treated, she thought about how far she had come from the young recruit that Commander Mitchell had compared to his granddaughter. She was still the same person inside, determined, compassionate, and committed to serving others. But combat had forged those qualities into something harder and more resilient than she had ever imagined possible. The incident marked a turning point in how Sarah was viewed by her unit and by the command structure. She was no longer seen as the young Marine who needed protection or careful oversight. She had proven herself as a leader and a warrior who could be counted on in the most dangerous and challenging situations. Little did she know that this was only the beginning of her remarkable military career. Second tour in Afghanistan. After completing her first deployment in Iraq, Sarah Martinez returned to Camp Pendleton in early 2006 with a Bronze Star, a Purple Heart, and a reputation that preceded her throughout the Marine Corps. The young woman who had once been dismissed as too small and too young for combat had become something of a legend among the Marines who had served with her. But Sarah found the transition back to stateside life surprisingly difficult. The quiet neighborhoods of Southern California seemed almost surreal after months of constant vigilance and life-or-death decisions. Simple activities like grocery shopping or driving on peaceful highways felt strange and somehow disconnected from reality. Sarah experienced what many combat veterans face: the sense that the most meaningful and intense experiences of her life had happened in a war zone, and that everything else seemed pale by comparison. During her stateside assignment, Sarah was promoted to corporal and assigned to help train new Marines preparing for deployment. She found purpose in sharing her hard-earned knowledge with recruits who would soon face the same challenges she had overcome. Her training sessions were known for their realism and practical focus. She didn't sugarcoat the realities of combat, but she also emphasized that proper preparation and teamwork could overcome seemingly impossible situations. It was during this training assignment that Sarah encountered Commander Mitchell again. He was now serving in a different capacity at Camp Pendleton, and when he learned that one of his training instructors was the same Marine he had once compared to his granddaughter, he requested a meeting. "Corporal Martinez," he said when Sarah reported to his office, "I've been reading your service record from Iraq. I have to tell you I owe you an apology. When you were going through basic training, I made some assumptions about your capabilities that were completely wrong." Sarah stood at attention, unsure how to respond to what seemed like a very personal admission from a senior officer. "Sir, no apology is necessary. You couldn't have known how things would turn out." "That's exactly the point," Commander Mitchell continued. "I should have known better than to judge any Marine's potential based on appearance or age. Your service record speaks for itself, and I wanted you to know that your example has changed how I evaluate recruits. You've made me a better trainer and a better Marine." In late 2007, Sarah received orders for her second deployment, this time to Afghanistan as part of the expanding operations in that theater. The war in Afghanistan presented different challenges from Iraq. The terrain was more mountainous, the climate more extreme, and the enemy tactics had evolved to take advantage of the rugged landscape that provided natural defensive positions. Sarah was assigned to a forward operating base in Helmand Province, one of the most contested regions in Afghanistan. Her unit's mission was to work with Afghan National Army forces to conduct counterinsurgency operations against Taliban fighters who controlled large portions of the rural areas surrounding the base. The base, called Fob Thunder, was even more austere than the facilities Sarah had experienced in Iraq. Located in a valley surrounded by mountains, it was frequently subjected to rocket and mortar attacks, launched from positions high in the surrounding hills. The Taliban fighters knew the terrain intimately and used it to their advantage, appearing suddenly for attacks and then melting away into the mountainous landscape. Sarah's new unit commander, Major Williams, had specifically requested her assignment to his command after reviewing her service record from Iraq. He was planning several high-risk operations that would require Marines with proven combat experience and the ability to perform under extreme pressure. Her first major operation in Afghanistan was a joint mission with Afghan Army forces to clear a Taliban stronghold from a series of villages in a remote valley. Intelligence indicated that the Taliban had been using the area as a staging ground for attacks on coalition supply convoys and had established a significant weapons cache somewhere in the region. The operation began before dawn with a helicopter insertion into the target area. Sarah's squad was tasked with establishing an observation post on a ridge overlooking the main village, while other units moved in to conduct the primary assault. The plan called for coordinated attacks from multiple directions to prevent the Taliban fighters from escaping into the mountains. As Sarah's squad moved into position, they encountered unexpected resistance. A large group of Taliban fighters had prepared defensive positions along the ridge, anticipating that coalition forces would attempt to use the high ground for observation. What was supposed to be a routine movement to an overwatch position became a fierce firefight at close quarters. During the engagement, Sarah's squad leader, Staff Sergeant Torres, was seriously wounded by a sniper's bullet. With their leader down and the squad pinned down by accurate enemy fire, Sarah took command of the situation. She immediately began coordinating with other elements of the operation, calling in precise artillery strikes on Taliban positions while directing her squad's movement to more defensible terrain. The fighting continued for several hours as Taliban reinforcements arrived from neighboring villages. Sarah found herself commanding not only her own squad, but also coordinating the actions of an Afghan army unit that had become separated from their own leadership during the chaotic battle. Despite the language barrier and cultural differences, she managed to organize an effective defense that held the ridge until air support arrived. During the battle, Sarah was struck by shrapnel from a Taliban rocket-propelled grenade. The metal fragments tore through her left shoulder and arm, causing significant bleeding and limiting her mobility. Despite her injuries, she continued to coordinate the fight, refusing medical evacuation until all of her Marines and the Afghan soldiers under her temporary command were safely evacuated from the ridge. Her actions during the operation resulted in her second Purple Heart and a Navy Cross, one of the highest decorations for valor that can be awarded to a Marine. The citation specifically noted her leadership under fire, her coordination of multinational forces, and her refusal to leave the battlefield while other soldiers remained in danger. But the physical wounds from Afghanistan healed more slowly than those from Iraq. The shrapnel damage to her shoulder required multiple surgeries and months of rehabilitation. During her recovery, Sarah had time to reflect on her military career and what she wanted to accomplish with the rest of her service. She realized that her experiences had given her unique insights into combat leadership and small unit tactics that could benefit other Marines. She began writing detailed after-action reports and tactical analyses based on her combat experiences, sharing lessons learned that could help save lives in future operations. Sarah's reputation within the Marine Corps continued to grow. She was invited to speak at military colleges and training centers, sharing her experiences with officer candidates and senior enlisted Marines. Her presentations were notable for their practical focus and her ability to explain complex tactical concepts in terms that junior Marines could understand and apply. During one of these speaking engagements at the Naval War College, Sarah was asked by a student officer how her physical size had affected her ability to lead Marines in combat. Her answer became widely quoted within military circles. Leadership isn't about being the biggest or strongest person in the room. It's about being the one who's willing to make the hard decisions and take responsibility for the consequences. Combat doesn't care how tall you are or what you look like. It only cares about whether you can think clearly under pressure and whether you'll stand by your people when things get difficult. As Sarah prepared for what she assumed would be her final deployment, she had no way of knowing that her most challenging and defining experiences still lay ahead. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were evolving, and new types of threats were emerging that would test everything she had learned about combat, leadership, and personal courage. Her reputation as a small Marine who had overcome size and age prejudices to become one of the Corps' most decorated combat veterans was well established. But Sarah Martinez was about to face challenges that would push her far beyond anything she had previously experienced and cement her place in military history. The ambush that changed everything, 2009, Sergeant Sarah Martinez had become one of the most respected Marines in her division. Now 25 years old and with 2 combat deployments behind her, she was assigned to train and lead a specialized reconnaissance team preparing for deployment to one of the most dangerous regions of Afghanistan. The team's mission would involve deep reconnaissance operations behind enemy lines, gathering intelligence on Taliban leadership and weapon supplies. Her team consisted of 8 Marines, all volunteers who had been selected for their specialized skills and combat experience. Sarah was one of the youngest team leaders ever assigned to such high-risk operations, but her combat record and leadership abilities had earned her the respect of both her subordinates and superiors. The team spent 6 months training together, developing the tight coordination and trust that would be essential for their survival in hostile territory. Their deployment began in spring 2009 with assignment to a remote forward operating base in eastern Afghanistan, near the border with Pakistan. The region was known for its difficult terrain, extreme weather conditions, and heavy Taliban presence. Coalition forces had limited control beyond the immediate vicinity of their bases, making reconnaissance operations both critically important and extremely dangerous. Sarah's team was tasked with their most challenging mission yet, to conduct a week-long reconnaissance operation in a valley system where Taliban forces were believed to be staging attacks on coalition supply lines. The mission would require the team to move on foot through more than 30 miles of mountainous terrain, establish hidden observation posts, and gather detailed intelligence on enemy movements and capabilities. The team inserted by helicopter under cover of darkness, landing several miles from their target area to avoid detection. Sarah had planned their route carefully, using satellite imagery and intelligence reports to identify potential hazards and escape routes. The plan called for them to establish their first observation post within 24 hours and begin gathering intelligence on Taliban activities in the A Valley. The first 3 days of the mission proceeded smoothly. Sarah's team successfully established 2 observation posts and gathered valuable intelligence on Taliban supply routes and leadership meetings. They documented the movement of weapons and personnel through the valley, providing information that would be crucial for planning future coalition operations in the region. On the 4th day, while the team was moving to establish their 3rd observation post, they were discovered by a Taliban patrol. What followed was the most intense combat experience of Sarah's military career. The Taliban patrol immediately called for reinforcements, and within hours, Sarah's 8-person team found themselves surrounded by more than 40 enemy fighters in terrain that offered limited cover and concealment. The battle began at dawn and continued for more than 12 hours. Sarah's team was positioned on a rocky outcrop that provided some defensive advantage, but they were completely surrounded and had limited ammunition and supplies. Taliban fighters attacked repeatedly from multiple directions, using rocket-propelled grenades and machine guns to try to dislodge the Marines from their position. During the first Taliban assault, 2 of Sarah's Marines were seriously wounded. Corporal Williams took shrapnel from a grenade that exploded near their position, causing severe injuries to his legs and abdomen. Lance Corporal Davis was struck by rifle fire that shattered his left arm and caused significant blood loss. Both Marines required immediate medical attention, but calling for medical evacuation would reveal their position to additional enemy forces and put rescue helicopters at extreme risk. Sarah made the decision to continue, fighting while treating the wounded Marines herself. Using her advanced medical training, she stabilized both wounded Marines under fire, administering morphine for pain and applying pressure dressings to control bleeding. At the same time, she coordinated her team's defensive fire, ensuring that Taliban fighters could not advance close enough to overrun their position. As the battle continued, Sarah's team began running low on ammunition. She implemented strict fire discipline, ordering her Marines to make every shot count and to coordinate their fire to maximize its effectiveness. She also began calling in artillery strikes on Taliban positions, using her radio to guide precise fire support that helped keep enemy forces at a distance. During the afternoon, a Taliban sniper managed to position himself where he could target Sarah's Marines from an elevated position several hundred meters away. The sniper had already wounded one Marine and was making it impossible for the team to move or reposition. Sarah realized that someone would have to eliminate the sniper before he could inflict more casualties on her team. Taking only her rifle and a small amount of ammunition, Sarah left the relative safety of her team's position and began a dangerous solo movement toward the sniper's location. The approach required her to move across open ground while under observation from multiple enemy positions. She used every piece of cover available, moving carefully from rock to rock while Taliban fighters tried to track her movement. It took Sarah nearly 2 hours to work her way close enough to engage the sniper. When she finally had a clear shot, she discovered that the sniper was positioned with several other Taliban fighters who were coordinating attacks on her team's position. Sarah realized that she had stumbled upon a Taliban command post that was directing the entire attack. Rather than simply eliminating the sniper and withdrawing, Sarah made the decision to attack the entire command post. Using grenades she had brought with her, she launched a surprise assault on the Taliban position, killing or wounding several enemy fighters and disrupting their coordination of the attack. The action created enough confusion among the Taliban forces to allow her team to reposition to a more defensible location. Sarah's solo assault on the Taliban command post became legendary among Marines, who heard the story later. She had left her team's defensive position, moved more than half a mile through enemy-controlled terrain, and single-handedly disrupted an attack by a force that outnumbered her team by more than 5-1. Her actions directly saved the lives of her wounded Marines and gave her team the opportunity to establish a defense that could last until help arrived. The battle continued until evening, when air support finally arrived to drive off the remaining Taliban fighters. Medical evacuation helicopters were able to land and transport the wounded Marines to a field hospital, where all of them eventually recovered from their injuries. Sarah's team had held their position for more than 14 hours against overwhelming odds, and none of her Marines had been killed. The operation resulted in Sarah's third Purple Heart, awarded for shrapnel wounds she received during the final Taliban assault, and a Silver Star for her extraordinary heroism during the battle. But more significantly, the intelligence her team had gathered during their reconnaissance mission led to a major coalition operation that disrupted Taliban activities throughout the entire region. The story of the 12-hour battle spread quickly through military channels. Sarah's decision to leave her defensive position and attack a Taliban command post alone was studied at military academies as an example of tactical innovation under extreme pressure. Her ability to lead a small team against overwhelming odds while caring for wounded Marines demonstrated the kind of leadership that the Marine Corps sought to develop in all its non-commissioned officers. During her recovery from the wounds sustained in Afghanistan, Sarah was approached by senior Marine Corps leadership about accepting a commission as an officer. Her combat experience, leadership abilities, and tactical knowledge made her an ideal candidate for officer training, and she would have been fast-tracked through the commissioning process. However, Sarah declined the offer. She explained that she preferred to remain an enlisted Marine, working directly with the Marines who did the fighting, rather than moving into the more administrative roles that often came with higher officer positions. She wanted to continue serving in positions where she could make a direct impact on combat operations and the safety of individual Marines. Instead, Sarah accepted assignment to the Marine Corps Advanced Infantry Training Program, where she would help develop new tactics and training methods based on lessons learned from recent combat operations. Her real-world experience with small unit operations in complex terrain made her uniquely qualified to evaluate and improve training programs for Marines, preparing for deployment. The assignment also gave Sarah the opportunity to work with military researchers who were studying combat stress, leadership under pressure, and the factors that contributed to successful small unit operations. Her experiences became case studies that were used to improve training methods and selection criteria for specialized military units. But perhaps most importantly, Sarah's reputation had spread beyond the Marine Corps. Other military services and allied nations began requesting her input on training programs and tactical development. She became one of the most sought-after instructors for teaching combat leadership and small unit tactics to special operations forces from around the world. During one international training exercise, Sarah worked with British Special Air Service operators, German. The final mission in early 2011, Staff Sergeant Sarah Martinez received orders for what would become her final and most significant deployment. At 27 years old, she was now considered one of the Marine Corps' most experienced combat leaders. With 3 Purple Hearts, a Silver Star, a Bronze Star, and a Navy Cross decorating her service record. Her reputation had grown far beyond her original unit, and she was specifically requested for a highly classified mission that would require all of her accumulated skills and experience. Sarah was assigned to lead a joint task force consisting of Marines, Army Rangers, and Navy SEALs in a series of operations targeting high-value Taliban and al-Qaeda leadership in the mountainous border region between Afghanistan and Pakistan. The mission was part of the broader campaign to degrade terrorist leadership capabilities and disrupt their ability to plan and execute attacks against coalition forces. The task force was based at a classified location that served as the staging ground for deep reconnaissance and direct action missions throughout the region. Sarah's role was to plan and execute the ground operations while coordinating with intelligence agencies and air support elements. It was the kind of responsibility typically given to much more senior leaders. But her proven ability to operate effectively in complex, high-risk environments made her the ideal choice for the assignment. Her team for this deployment consisted of 12 of the most experienced special operations personnel from across the military services. Each member had been individually selected for their specialized skills and their ability to work effectively in small independent units. Sarah was the only Marine on the team and one of only 2 women, but her reputation preceded her, and she was accepted immediately as the team leader. The first several missions proceeded successfully. Sarah's team conducted precision raids on Taliban safe houses, captured several high-ranking terrorist leaders, and gathered intelligence that led to the disruption of multiple planned attacks. Her ability to plan complex operations and adapt quickly to changing situations earned her the respect of even the most experienced special operations veterans on her team. The mission that would define Sarah's legacy began with intelligence indicating that a high-ranking al-Qaeda leader was meeting with Taliban commanders in a remote compound deep in Taliban-controlled territory. The target was considered one of the most important terrorist leaders still operating in the region, and his capture or elimination was deemed a high priority by military and intelligence leadership. The compound was located in a valley surrounded by steep mountains, accessible only by a narrow trail that could easily be defended by a small force. Intelligence indicated that the target would be at the compound for only a few hours during a specific window, making timing critical for the mission's success. Sarah's team would have to move quickly and strike before the target could escape into the mountainous terrain, where he would be nearly impossible to track. Sarah spent days planning the operation, studying satellite imagery and intelligence reports to identify the best approach routes and contingency plans. She coordinated with air support elements to ensure that helicopter extraction would be available if the mission went wrong. And she developed multiple backup plans for different scenarios that might develop during the operation. The team inserted by helicopter several miles from the target compound under cover of darkness. Sarah led them on a difficult approach march through mountainous terrain, using night vision equipment and specialized navigation techniques to avoid Taliban patrols and reach their objective undetected. The approach took most of the night, and by dawn, they were in position to observe the compound and confirm the presence of their target. What Sarah's team discovered when they reached the compound was far different from what intelligence had predicted. Instead of the small meeting described in their briefing, they found a major gathering of Taliban and al-Qaeda leadership from throughout the region. More than 50 heavily armed fighters were protecting the compound, and the meeting appeared to involve planning for a major terrorist operation. Sarah faced a critical decision. Her team was vastly outnumbered and positioned far from any possible support. The original mission plan called for a quick strike against a lightly defended target, but the situation they encountered was far more complex and dangerous. She could abort the mission and withdraw safely, or she could attempt to disrupt what appeared to be a significant terrorist planning meeting. After consulting with her team members and considering the potential intelligence value of the target, Sarah made the decision to proceed with the mission, despite the changed circumstances. She modified her tactical plan to account for the larger enemy force and began positioning her team for a coordinated assault on the compound. The attack began at dawn with Sarah's team engaging the perimeter guards simultaneously from multiple positions. The element of surprise allowed them to neutralize the outer defenses quickly, but the alarm was raised and the Taliban fighters inside the compound began organizing a coordinated defense. What followed was the most intense combat of Sarah's career. Sarah led her team in a building-by-building assault on the compound, fighting room to room against determined enemy resistance. The Taliban fighters were well-trained and well-equipped, and they used the compound's defensive advantages to slow the assault and inflict casualties on the attacking force. During the fighting, 3 of Sarah's team members were wounded, including her second-in-command, who took a bullet to the chest and required immediate medical attention. Despite being outnumbered more than 4-1, Sarah's team maintained their assault momentum through superior training, coordination, and Sarah's tactical leadership. She coordinated the team's movement through the compound while providing medical care to wounded team members and calling in air support to suppress enemy positions. During the final phase of the assault, Sarah discovered that several high-value targets were attempting to escape through a tunnel system that connected the compound to caves in the surrounding mountains. Leaving her wounded team members in defensible positions, she pursued the escaping terrorists into the tunnel system alone. The pursuit through the underground tunnels was a nightmare of close-quarters combat in complete darkness. Sarah fought her way through several Taliban fighters who were attempting to block the tunnels, while their leaders escaped. Using night vision equipment and her rifle, she engaged multiple enemies in a confined space where a single mistake could have been fatal. Sarah eventually cornered 3 high-ranking terrorist leaders in a dead-end section of the tunnel system. Rather than attempting to fight their way out, the terrorists attempted to negotiate their surrender in exchange for information about planned attacks. Sarah accepted their surrender and successfully brought them back through the tunnel system to rejoin her team. The mission was an unprecedented success. Sarah's team had captured 3 high-value terrorist targets, killed or wounded more than 20 Taliban fighters, and gathered intelligence materials that led to the disruption of multiple planned terrorist attacks. All of her team members survived their wounds and were successfully evacuated from the compound. The operation resulted in Sarah's 4th Purple Heart for injuries sustained during the tunnel fighting, and recommendation for the Medal of Honor, the highest decoration that can be awarded to a member of the United States military. Her leadership during the mission, particularly her decision to pursue escaping terrorists into the tunnel system alone, was cited as an example of extraordinary heroism and selfless service. But for Sarah, the most important outcome of the mission was that all of her team members returned home safely. Throughout her military career, she had never lost a Marine or soldier under her command, a record that she valued more than any decoration or recognition she had received. As Sarah prepared to leave military service after completing her final deployment, she reflected on a career that had exceeded every expectation and challenged every assumption about what a small, young woman could accomplish in combat. She had proven that courage, intelligence, and determination were far more important than physical size or appearance when it came to military leadership, recognition, and legacy. The ceremony took place on a crisp autumn morning in 2012 at the White House, where Staff Sergeant Sarah Martinez stood at attention in her dress blue uniform, surrounded by family members who had watched her transformation from a determined young recruit into one of the most decorated Marines in Corps history. The President of the United States was about to present her with the Medal of Honor, making her one of only a handful of women to receive the nation's highest military decoration. As Sarah stood waiting for the ceremony to begin, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. 9 years earlier, she had been the small young recruit that Commander Mitchell had compared to his granddaughter. Now, at 28 years old, she wore the ribbons representing 5 Purple Hearts, a Medal of Honor, a Navy Cross, a Silver Star, and a Bronze Star, decorations that told the story of a military career that had redefined what was possible for women in combat. The citation for Sarah's Medal of Honor was read aloud during the ceremony, describing her actions during the final mission in Afghanistan, but the words seemed inadequate to capture the full scope of what she had accomplished throughout her military career. The official language spoke of conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty, but it couldn't convey the countless small acts of leadership and courage that had made her legendary among the Marines who had served with her. In the audience were many of the Marines whose lives Sarah had saved during her multiple deployments. Corporal Wilson, whom she had pulled from a burning vehicle in Iraq, was there with his wife and children. The 3 Marines she had rescued during the 12-hour battle in Afghanistan were present, all of them having made full recoveries from their wounds. Staff Sergeant Torres, her former squad leader, had flown in from his current assignment to witness the ceremony. Commander Mitchell, now retired from active duty, was also in attendance. After the ceremony, he approached Sarah to congratulate her personally. "Sergeant Martinez," he said, "I wanted to thank you for teaching an old Marine some important lessons about leadership and courage. You've made all of us better Marines." Sarah's response was characteristically modest. "Sir, I was just doing my job. Every Marine I served with showed the same kind of courage when it mattered." But Sarah's impact extended far beyond her individual combat achievements. Her career had coincided with and contributed to significant changes in military policy regarding women in combat roles. Her proven effectiveness in the most dangerous combat situations had helped demonstrate that gender was not a reliable predictor of combat performance, leading to policy changes that opened previously restricted military occupations to women. Military academies began using Sarah's combat experiences as case studies in their leadership and tactics courses. Her methods for building unit cohesion, making decisions under pressure, and leading diverse teams became part of the curriculum for training future military officers. The Marine Corps developed specialized training programs based on techniques Sarah had pioneered during her deployments. After leaving active duty, Sarah was offered numerous opportunities in the private sector, including high-paying positions with defense contractors and consulting firms. However, she chose to remain connected to the military community by accepting a position as a civilian instructor at the Marine Corps War College, where she could continue sharing her knowledge and experience with future military leaders. Her classes at the War College became some of the most popular and respected in the curriculum. Sarah's teaching style emphasized practical application over theoretical knowledge, using real combat scenarios to illustrate leadership principles and tactical concepts. Her students, many of whom were senior officers with extensive military experience, consistently rated her courses as among the most valuable parts of their education. Sarah also became a sought-after speaker at military and civilian leadership conferences. Her presentations focused on the importance of preparation, the value of diverse perspectives in decision-making, and the critical role that small unit leadership plays in military success. She emphasized that effective leadership was not about personal recognition or advancement, but about taking responsibility for the welfare and success of the people under your command. During one memorable presentation at a major military leadership conference, Sarah was asked about how her experiences as a woman in combat had shaped her approach to leadership. Her response became widely quoted in military leadership literature. "Combat doesn't recognize gender, race, or any other characteristic except competence and courage. The Marines I led in battle didn't follow me because I was male or female. They followed me because I had proven that I would make good decisions under pressure, and that I would never abandon them when things got difficult." That's what leadership is really about. Sarah's influence extended beyond military circles. She became an advocate for veterans' issues, particularly focusing on the challenges faced by combat veterans transitioning to civilian life. She worked with veteran service organizations to develop programs that helped former military personnel find meaningful careers and adjust to life outside the military. Her work with veteran organizations brought her into contact with thousands of former service members who had struggled with the transition to civilian life. Sarah's own experience with the difficulties of leaving military service made her particularly effective at helping other veterans find purpose and direction after their military careers ended. In 2015, Sarah was approached about writing a book about her military experiences. Initially reluctant to focus attention on her individual achievements, she eventually agreed to the project when she realized that her story could inspire young people, particularly women, to pursue careers in military service or other challenging fields where they might face discrimination or low expectations. The book, titled Beyond Expectations: A Marine's Journey, became a bestseller and was adapted into a documentary film that was shown at military installations around the world. Sarah donated all proceeds from the book and film to veteran support, organizations, and scholarship programs for military families. The documentary included interviews with many of the Marines who had served with Sarah throughout her career. Their testimonials painted a picture of a leader who had consistently put the welfare of her Marines above her own safety and advancement. One of her former squad members summed up the feelings of many when he said, "Sergeant Martinez taught us that leadership isn't about being the biggest or strongest person in the room. It's about being the one who will stand up when everyone else is looking for someone else to take charge." Perhaps the most meaningful recognition Sarah received came in 2017, when the Marine Corps established the Martinez Leadership Award, given annually to the non-commissioned officer who best exemplifies the leadership qualities demonstrated throughout Sarah's career. The award criteria emphasized courage under fire, concern for the welfare of subordinates, and the ability to accomplish missions under difficult circumstances. As Sarah reflected on her post-military career and the recognition she had received, she remained focused on the future rather than the past. She was particularly proud of the young Marines she continued to mentor through her teaching and speaking engagements. Many of them had gone on to distinguished military careers of their own, carrying forward the leadership principles they had learned from studying her example. The little girl who had once been compared to a commander's granddaughter had become a leader whose influence extended throughout the military and beyond. Sarah Martinez had proven that determination, courage, and competence could overcome any initial disadvantage or prejudice. Her legacy was not just her own remarkable achievements, but the doors she had opened for future generations of women in military service and the leadership principles she had demonstrated for all Marines to follow. Today, when young Marines report for their first assignments, they often hear stories about Sergeant Martinez, the small Marine who had won 5 Purple Hearts and proven that heroes come in all sizes. Her example continues to inspire new generations of military leaders who understand that true strength comes not from physical size or appearance, but from the willingness to serve others and the courage to do what is right, regardless of the personal cost.